In the pantheon of evocative video game title screens, few others get me like this one. Let me play it out for you. This is the title screen for Type Moon's 2000 visual novel Tsukihime, the very first game released by them, before they went on to make juggernauts of the medium like Fate Stay Night, Fate Hollow Ataraxia, Fate Stay Night Cart, and Fate Stay Night Saber's Sexy House Party. I tease, but it doesn't at all mystify that the duo who produced these works together, writer Kinoko Nasu and illustrator Takashi Takeuchi, would go on to see so much success. For all the faults you can point out with both artists, it cannot be denied that creating compelling and emotionally resonant worlds is something they are quite good at. It just so happens that those worlds they create tend to be easily merchandisable sometimes. But before Holy Grails and anime girl historical figures was a simpler, the word simpler is relative here, story about vampires, love, death, the Vatican, and oh yeah, did I mention decades of familial trauma and abuse. Yeah, that's kind of a thing in it too. A major thing, in fact. We're not going to get into all of that here because this is ultimately supposed to be a pretty short bonus video, but all of it is at least tangentially related to the real star of the show, this main title theme. The title theme of Tsukihime, as you may suspect, is the game's overall main motif. It plays in this track, and in a lower key, similar sounding other, throughout much of the game. A fact emphasized even more by the fact that Tsukihime's soundtrack is very slim in terms of its overall selection. Of the unlabeled OGG tracks in the game's music folder, this one is track 8 and track 9 of only 10 in total. This is probably in no small part due to the fact that the game was so low budget, the very first VN Nasu ever made, and thus on a very understandably tight leash when it came to spending. Despite this spread-thin selection, as well as the many awkward silences you may encounter when the game just has no room to spice things up, I never quite found the small musical selection to be a detriment to the game, and in fact I think it made the handful of tracks we did get all the more memorable. But we're not talking about all of those, we're talking about this one. When you first boot up the game, I'd venture to say it hits like a sledgehammer right out of the gate. It's a very emotionally complex track, and when contrasted with the brilliant blue sky, the striking centered moon, and the simple logo text, it already sets a very strong impression going in. This is a story that you will doubtlessly anticipate great emotion from, though the kind is still left to be determined, until we watch the intro. The intro walks us through the biggest inciting incident for our protagonist Shiki Tono in his childhood, in which he witnessed the death of everyone close to him, including his mother. To dot around a bit, Tsukihime is a story that deals quite frequently with the weight of life and especially death. The very first thing to leave an impression in the story is a series of deaths that dramatically alter Shiki's place in the world, leaving him feeling alienated. The more somber, understated version of the theme plays here, creating a strong tie in our mind between this melancholic theme and the unfairness of a life taken away. But then, Shiki meets his sensei, Aoko Aozaki, who determines after hearing of his circumstances that he has now come into possession of the mystic eyes of death perception. This sort of becomes an important fixture of the story and its themes moving forward, as Shiki can see the lines of death on any living thing or object around him. This initially overwhelms and makes him sick, until Aoko gifts him a pair of glasses that allows him to ignore their presence. The lines when traced can totally kill something, bringing it to its natural endpoint. This sets up one of the central themes revolving around death, namely the weight of life, the weight of death, and what it means to live or end a life. Aoko tells Shiki that he is free to follow whatever path he may when it comes to these things, and that he may even trace the lines of something again someday, but that he must not ever do so carelessly or without thought. He must always remember how much it matters. The next time we hear this theme recur is during a meeting with the game's first main heroine, and scourged to everyone who only knows what a Neko arc is, Arcuade Brunstud. Yes, that is her actual name. This is after Shiki went crazy nuts with rapid onset violent libido due to his inherent vampire hunter genes. Don't worry about it, that's really complicated lore stuff that we don't have time to touch on. And barges his way into Arcuade's apartment to dismember her. Naturally, as a vampire, she survives this encounter, but she is extremely weakened and also pretty pissed off. While she does corner him in an alley the next day with the initial intent to kill him, she quickly loses her mojo when she decides the guy honestly just looks pretty pathetic and weirdly apologetic, so she decides to brush it under the rug for the moment if he fixes his mistake and helps her out with something. This kickstarts the plot, but again, let's circle back around to what's relevant here. We're getting another recurrence of this theme during a discussion surrounding death, namely around the weight of Shiki's decision to kill Arcuade. When she realizes that the full weight of his actions have really hit him, made an impression on him, and that he does truly feel guilty from the bottom of his heart, Arcuade relents on her initial plan to kill him in retaliation. The weight of death lingers with Shiki, and because she knows that, she chooses not to perpetuate even more, especially since, unlike her, he's not likely to come back from something like that. Now that we've pointed out two specific examples of where the theme plays in the game's first route, let's get a general impression of what the route is saying from a thematic perspective. Ultimately, Shiki teams up with Arcuade to hunt down a vampire in the city who is doing a bunch of serial killings, first fighting a guy named Narrow Chaos, and then against Arcuade's main rival, Roa. Roa is a dead apostle ancestor, essentially an elite vampire who had to be first tainted by a true ancestor, the pure-blooded kind of vampire that Arcuade herself is. He started as a priest, then became a mage, but his research was disrupted when he fell in love with Arcuade. And like any normal guy, he started hating the shit out of her for distracting him from his research. So when she became weak to her vampiric impulses, he tricked her into sucking his blood, burdening her with an urge to drink it for all time, something she wouldn't have dealt with if he hadn't intentionally coerced her. In the process of becoming a vampire, he began a cycle of essentially forcibly imprinting himself on multiple humans throughout history, chasing an endless cycle of manual reincarnation, whereas Arcuade herself would be sealed away, only ever woken to kill Roa's new incarnation every time he was born, locking the two in an eternal struggle where all Arcuade ever knew was battle. Eventually, because this is a romance VN, Arcuade obviously falls for Shiki over the course of their partnership. There's a lot of emphasis placed on the mundanity of life that she never got to experience, compelling her to realize the beauty of it that she'd never known, something she shares with and loves about Shiki himself. The weight of a life never lived, and one that unfortunately she can't live anymore in her true ending, where she's so weakened from her battle with Roa that she goes into eternal hibernation to avoid succumbing to her vampiric impulses, even though Shiki pleads with her to simply drink his blood and live on. She can't rob him of his own life in the process, something she may have relented on if she'd never discovered the true weight of life, of love, herself. In this route, the theme evolves to contextualize itself within the conversation of not just death, but a life well spent, of the fleeting nature of our material reality, the bonds and love we share, and how quickly that beauty can fade into darkness if we do not take advantage of it while we still have the chance. But Arcuade isn't the only girl Shiki can spend his time with, because guess what, there's 4 others, which we'll go through in slightly shorter order. Ciel's route is unfortunately my least favorite, well, sort of, but we'll get to it. It has a lot of thematic overlap with arcs specifically because it still contains a huge chunk of said route, definitely the main route with the least amount of time put into it. Of course, Ciel still ties pretty heavily into the already established themes though. Having been one of Roa's previous incarnations, she lives burdened with an undying body that's been tortured again and again for sins committed within it, turned into a soldier against her very own nature in order to right those wrongs and kill Roa. Ciel's route is not so much about realizing the value of life too late, but about having understood the value of one's own humanity, one's own finite life, and having that will stripped away by making that life infinite. She can no longer die, but therefore she cannot know peace. She strives for a return to mortality because it is what will finally remind her that she is living at all. A girl also forcibly turned into a weapon, who may have a chance to live normally when both her and Shiki's burdens are allowed to die. The theme doesn't really evolve again in my mind until the second set of routes, which start with Shiki's sister, Akiha. Yep, I know, sorry, it's that kind of game. This begins the far side of the moon routes, which focus much less on Tsukihime's supernatural elements and zero in much more on the family drama side of things. This one is my least favorite based on one very predictable fact. Even if they do try to pull the whole "wait, they're actually step-siblings, so it's cool" thing, which is a shame because I think it's pretty strong otherwise. Very strong, in fact. After a mini-arc where one of Shiki's old classmates, Satsuki Yumizuka, is turned into a vampire and has to be old-yellered out of her misery, we get a story where Akiha joins Shiki's class, but struggles with her own biological issues relating to her Oni blood, the blood of the Tono family, forcing her to drink kohakus in order to frequently stabilize herself. Her closeness to Shiki is tested when he learns of his adoption, and the fact that his memory was altered to make him feel as though he was part of the family, when in reality the real Shiki, all caps Shiki, awoke to his Oni blood, taking a part of our Shiki's life after trying to kill him, thus linking the two forever and explaining the many instances where Shiki feels as if his mind is being taken over. This inhuman all-caps Shiki tries to kidnap Akiha, filled with rage at having his life and sister stolen from him, prompting him to deprive Akiha of her own autonomy, awakening her to her impulses and turning her into a monster. Here, some very notable instances of the theme play, both during the death of Satsuki and when Akiha is reminiscing about her childhood with Shiki. There is a certain emphasis that has always been placed thematically on the mundanity of life and how that is, in some ways, the definition of true living, but this really makes the theme feel like it's not just about death or the absence of a life well lived, but on the simple quality of one's own humanity, how a life spent in constant pursuit of escaping said humanity while never indulging in it is ultimately worthless. This is something that often characterizes Roa, or all caps Shiki, that persistent chasing of an eternity that will never exist, or even more so in all caps Shiki's case, a want to regain a life he feels was owed to him, stolen from him. In Akiha's true ending, Shiki sacrifices his own life to restore her strength and her mind. She doesn't want to go on living without him, but still senses at his grave that he may be out there somewhere, and promises to wait for him. Though this ambiguity is still left open here, and indeed the game's sequel actually does provide a concrete answer to the questions posed by this ending, it's still very telling to me. Again, the weight of life plays a huge factor here, but in some respect, Shiki's own lack of respect towards his own life, its own weight, feels as though it is inherently tragic. Not only are we in conversation about life, death, and our own humanity, but the danger of taking that lightly, of throwing ourselves away even if in service to someone else's life. Why did you not live for yourself then? Why can't we do that too? One of two family maids, Hisui, has this hammered out even further in her route, with the reveal that to spare her the sexual abuse of Shiki's father, Makihisa, a situation which is its own whole can of worms related to the sister's synchronization abilities and Makihisa's own overriding Oni blood, her sister, Kohaku, would often take the brunt of said abuse in her place, leaving her hollowed and vengeful, often completely dissociating from her own pain, like she would during the abuse, as a means of protecting herself from it, viewing herself outside of herself, like a doll who feels nothing. Ironically, this diverts from the reader's expectation in this regard, as Kohaku has always been energetic and cheery, while Hisui has remained stoic and cold. Shiki even misremembers a promise to Kohaku to take her away from the mansion as a promise to Hisui for this very reason. She ends up killing both all-caps Shiki and Akiha, the latter of whom more or less lets her do it since she feels complicit in her suffering, and is only stopped from killing herself due to Shiki's own intervention, though she does lose her memory in the process. Debatable in terms of whether you consider it her own life anymore. Again, the theme plays in some pretty notable instances during this route, as Shiki ponders about Hisui's detached nature and yearning for companionship, shortly before Kohaku accidentally cuts herself and claims to feel nothing at all, when Shiki tries to give Hisui Kohaku's ribbon that he mistakes for hers, when Shiki takes care of Hisui's wound, when Hisui reveals that Kohaku has been disguising herself as Hisui to drug Shiki, as Shiki reads Makihisa's diary, all caps Shiki's death, and during Kohaku's confession. This is where I really think I started to get it. Beyond even the supernatural elements of Tsukihime's story, this is where everything began to click for me about the game's overall vibe, and it's where the theme really evolved the most for me. I'd thought before that I really wrapped my head around the vibe, but even now I was learning so much that was casting the rest of the story into a whole new light in retrospect, lending itself to the many different contexts this theme was used in the first go around. I'd say that here it really underpins the futility of how we live, the emptiness that underpins so many of our actions, strongly felt or not. Shiki can't remember who his promise is to. Kohaku desperately tries to shield herself from her pain. Shiki cannot mend Hisui's heart while she is still protected by her suffering sister. Makihisa's demonic traits overrides his human will and leads to the suffering of an innocent girl, and said girl throws her own life aside after an existence full of agony strips away the only people she cares about. People she cannot help but want to make suffer for their inaction, leading to her circumstances. If up until now this somber piano has felt like a symphony of lives lost but found through others, this is a funeral procession, the twilight before a dawn we will never see, as cloaked in darkness, we drive ourselves and others to our graves, because to live is to feel, and when you can't feel anything anymore, you begin to wonder whether you're living in the first place. Who's to say you died if you can't remember why you were born? But there is still one route left, Kohaku's, obviously, though I do reckon it is a bit rushed, mostly because it exists to give the poor girl some kind of resolution and closure. It's still pretty impactful all the same, even if I feel Hisui's is the strongest thematically. In this route, Shiki doesn't even have to fight all-caps Shiki, as they settle their differences peacefully during a talk where they don't even realize who the other is. Realizing that he'd be killed if he started trouble with Shiki, all-caps Shiki leaves town and is ultimately dealt with by Akiha and Kohaku, before he has a chance to realize he just talked to the guy he was mega pissed off at. In short order, Shiki remembers with Hisui's help that Kohaku is the one he must return the ribbon to. Akiha is possessed by all-caps Shiki's madness, and though she rampages for a while, she's stopped by Shiki and Kohaku both. The latter's resentment for the family fading when her suffering is acknowledged, falling for the boy she wanted to save her so long ago. As Akiha similarly restrains herself from attacking Kohaku because of her subconscious affection for the girl. People seeking salvation in each other, ending in a beautiful field of flowers, a true smile finally on her face. Another memorable set of plays here, like when Kohaku asks Shiki why he came back, when Akiha is overcome by her impulses, when Hisui reveals Kohaku's wish, when Shiki and Kohaku confess their feelings to each other, when Shiki confronts Akiha, when Akiha relents, and during the eclipse. Oh, right, there is an epilogue, by the way, that's kind of important. As you might correctly suspect, our entire journey with this theme sort of wraps up here, with the bookend of Shiki meeting his teacher once again. According to her, the excessive use of his mystic eyes has brought him pretty close to the end of his lifespan, which she feels guilty about, considering she's the one who encouraged him to place such a huge value in life. If he had simply given in from the beginning, not placed so much weight on all of this, would he have lived an easier life? A longer one? Shiki resists this, though. A life well spent is not determined by how long it is, but by one's own contentment with it. Yeah, that may be true, now that you mention it. If I gave up, it may have been a little easier, but that has no meaning. It would only have made things a little easier, and to start out with, I never thought of it as particularly painful. You have the wrong idea, Sensei. Everything I did because I wanted to. It's not like I'm a saint or anything. I like myself just the way I am. That's why I was glad that you told me back then to become an adult by living just the way I was. Sensei, I don't regret anything, so there's no reason for you to regret anything either. Take care, Shiki. Let's meet again if we're fated to do so. She says this as if it was nothing, and the wind suddenly gusts, swoosh. It rustles through the swaying grass, and the moon's light disappears. And thus we are brought back to a familiar visual, the moon of the title screen, where we've heard this theme so many times. Throughout the game, every time we booted it up to read this story, and along with it, our parting text. The heavens soar high above. I look up while embraced by the clear, brisk night air. All things are uncertain, just like a waking dream. The past is all an illusion. It doesn't leave behind a tangible form, and even the most vivid of memories are really just transient. Yet, I believe that the moon's image will never fade away. Even that is fragile. Even though I know it will end one day, I don't care. The memories continue on. I'm sure that even the end will be a happy one. The lunar eclipse is far away. Everyone races through their remaining time and passes on. The weight of life and death is something we ultimately decide. We can choose to live selfishly, we can choose to live well, we can hold on to our humanity or abandon it. We can accept futility or embrace it. We can find our meaning within each other, we can break each other, and we can come back together. Everything in the world is but a passing dream, transient existence, a liminality between two states of blissful non-existence. We get one shot to make it count, and so we must do with it what makes us content. We can't waste it chasing an illusion. We can't throw it away to fulfill a duty. We can't suffer in silence hoping to one day gain meaning through stripping others of theirs. We must reminisce, share, love, and hold on. Hold on tight, making the most and never letting go until one day we lay back and see a brilliant blue glass moon under the crimson air. The game ends and we're back to the title. The evolution is complete. Now, when I hear that somber piano, I don't just feel one way. I feel a lot of ways about how we live, about how we die, about how we connect with others, and how we fail them. How we come into this world and how everything we did in it will eventually fade. But is it meaningless? Maybe to some, but not to us. And that's all that matters, right? Live well, and maybe someday, you'll die well. But until then, we're left with the memories we made along the way to where we are now, whether that's firmly in the midst of life or on our way out, on our back, closing our eyes by the light of the moon. And every time I open this game and hear this song, I remember.